you get to a time where there's a lot of hormonal changes, like in midlife, this can significantly impact how your sensory system responds to this external stimuli. And this can be often a sign of various things. It can be a sign of dysregulation. It can be a sign of hormonal problems, like in menopause, et cetera, or perimenopause, where we have all those hormones going down, et cetera, et cetera. But the two things can be connected. So things can actually, be a cause and a consequence. So it is a quite complex system, but we know that sensory overload can be a symptom of dysregulation, as well as a symptom of, again, hormonal and perimenopausal or menopausal conditions.
Hey friends, welcome to The Good Life with Michelle Lamoureux, a show for women in midlife who want to live happier, healthier, and more meaningful lives. I'm your host, Michelle Lamoureux, a self-love coach and the author of Design a Life You Love. And together we're going to be doing just that. Each week I bring on world-class experts, best-selling authors, leading entrepreneurs, and also do solo casts with the intention of inviting you to get connected to what you really desire from your life. This show is produced with love every week. There's inspiration and actionable tips in every episode because I want to see women playing a starring role in their lives instead of living on the sidelines. Be sure to join the Good Life community newsletter over at thegoodlifecoach.com for more inspiration and tips to live your best midlife. And make sure you're following the show on your favorite podcast player. I'm so glad that you're here. Hey friends, it's Michelle Lamoureux and welcome back to the show. I have a fascinating conversation lined up for you today. We're going to be talking and learning about nervous system dysregulation, how to take control of stress and anxiety to prevent burnout and live a more fulfilling life. Joining us today is Dr. Linnea Passaler, who has dedicated over 20 years to serving patients, first as a successful surgeon and then to thousands of people worldwide as the CEO of a digital health startup. After overcoming her own struggles with a dysregulated nervous system, she created Heal Your Nervous System to empower others in their healing journey. Her combination of neuroscience and somatic work helps those struggling with overwhelm, trauma, burnout, and anxiety to heal their dysregulated nervous systems and thrive. She's the author of the book, Heal Your Nervous System, which we're going to be talking about today. Welcome, Dr. Linnea.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be here.
Well, I'm honored you're on. I think this is such an important book. I think it's so timely and it's so beautifully written. So I just want to say congrats on all of that. I know it's going to resonate with so many people. And what's so interesting for me was that I had just been reading some article on our nervous systems and dysregulation. And I was reflecting on having worn a back brace for 6 years. And I thought, oh, this is starting to make sense. And then your publicist reached out with your book. And I was like, oh my gosh, look at that synchronicity. So we're all so fortunate to be learning from you today. Since it's going to be the foundation of our conversation, let's just start with a definition of what is nervous system dysregulation. I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the introduction, Michelle, and for the compliments. I really hope this, this book and what we are doing can resonate with people. So I think it's important to understand the simplest way to understand dysregulation is by essentially comparing what regulation is and what dysregulation is. And so when the nervous system is exposed to external stressors, we go through our daily stressors, our daily life, the tasks that we do every day. This creates stress. But the nervous system is well equipped to essentially manage that stress. And so it's like a fern. I use this analogy of the fern. So the fern bends under stressors, but it's flexible. So it recovers quickly after this stressor has been removed. And that is the the landmark, the most clear indication that the nervous system is well regulated. So it's okay to become, overwhelmed at times, to become stressed, to have big responses, and even to become, angry, anxious, etc., etc. But what makes the difference is whether that nervous system can recover after that situation has passed. Now, when the nervous system is dysregulated, it has lost this natural flexibility. And so it's stuck. And if the nervous system is dysregulated, it ends up spending too much time in this chronically activated state and not enough time in a rest and recovery state. And that's what creates all those physical and emotional symptoms, because our body and our nervous system need to spend enough time in a rest and recovery state. And when we're constantly activated and the nervous system is unable to completely relax, completely let go, that's where the damage starts accumulating. And that's where all of these, symptoms that are very diverse and very wide. People can experience, physical symptoms and emotional symptoms. So anything from anxiety, even autoimmune conditions, burnout, chronic fatigue, but even, more emotional and, traditionally called mental health, symptoms can show up, like, depersonalization, derealization, extreme sensitivities, sensory overload. All of these can show up when the nervous system is dysregulated.
Okay, this is so helpful. And I'd love to go a layer deeper of some of those symptoms. You mentioned some of them. And I know in your book, you had a quiz where you could score yourself. And I did take the quiz. There was emotional, sensory, and physical, 3 different categories. And for me, it was the sensory that I was the most, so you had like sort of a lower, medium, and high in terms of where you were on dysregulation. And I would say I was sort of in the middle group, but mostly because of the sensory thing. So for me, sense, like overwhelming smells, like let's say, I don't know, you walk into a hotel room and it smells moldy, I'll find my body tensing up. Or we went to see Cirque du Soleil and I had seen one show and was fine, but this other show, we were sitting near the speakers and the lights were strobing and that it was so loud. I actually had to go sit in the lobby, and I felt kind of bad because I was there with my husband and my daughter. So I'm just giving some examples from my own experience because maybe this will sort of resonate with others as they're listening, but I'd love for you to expand on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So sensory overload is one of the things that people report most often. And I would say, especially for women in, middle life, when they start to be perimenopausal or menopausal, this is one of the areas where we see the most typical signs. And that really can depend on your baseline sensitivity. So we each have our own baseline sensitivity, and it depends, this is partly genetic and part has to do with, external factors, the environment, how you grew up, et cetera, et cetera. But regardless of your baseline sensitivity, which is something that you have had throughout your life, when you get to a time where there's a lot of hormonal changes, like in midlife, this can significantly impact how your sensory system responds to these external stimuli. And this can be often a sign of various things. It can be a sign of dysregulation. It can be a sign of hormonal problems, like in menopause, et cetera, or perimenopause, where we have all those hormones going down, et cetera, et cetera. But the two things can be connected. So things can actually, be a cause and a consequence. So it is a quite complex system, but we know that, sensory overload can be a symptom of dysregulation as well as a symptom of, again, hormonal and perimenopausal or menopausal, conditions.
It's so interesting. And, I'm wondering too, so for example, when I wore the back brace, Dr. Linnea, when the brace came off, I was 16 and I was not allergic to any foods. But that summer, I was suddenly allergic to apples. Like I had what's called an oral allergy syndrome. So not anaphylactic, but I couldn't eat any stone fruits anymore. And I'm wondering if some of this physical dysregulation triggered the inability to have those foods. Like I'm starting to put the pieces together of that puzzle. Does that make sense? Does that track?
I mean, it does make sense that your body can have a strong immunological response. Like we know that the immunological system is one of the systems, together with the digestive symptoms, the digestive system that can really sort of pay a big price when we are in a state of chronic stress. And, by being exposed, by being in a situation where your body wasn't able to move within a brace for many years.
Yes.
It's like your body has lived through a sort of chronic stressor that, became overwhelming for the body. And so it has definitely had some effects. Now, it's very difficult, based on the knowledge that we have of the science, to understand whether something like an allergic reaction or developing an allergic response is actually caused by that. We don't have any evidence, any clear evidence that we can really say, okay, this is the cause-effect relationship. But we are starting to learn and think a lot more holistically about these things. So we can't exclude that this was one of the factors. Of course, immunological conditions and allergic reactions are often also related to, genetic predispositions, etc. One of the important things that are emerging and that we have now very clear evidence is this model where we know that there may be some genetic predisposition, but then the conditions in life, yes, and what you go through and the amount of stress and how your body and brain learn to face those stressors. Yep. That's what really determines whether some conditions, some pathological conditions, some diseases really emerge, and to what degree.
Yeah, it turns on maybe that genetic code that if it didn't have those stressors, maybe it wouldn't have.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes. That makes sense. I'd love to have you share your journey with this. So, we talked in your bio about how you were a CEO of a health tech startup, a surgeon on one path, so successful. And I'd like to read a part of something I read in your book that really it resonated with me. And I think it's going to with the women, and you can elaborate on sort of the journey that took you into this direction and your research and your work in writing this book. You wrote, "I was so busy trying to save the world. I never stopped to look within. I was bypassing the real issue, ignoring the hard work of understanding myself. I had thought that my feelings of being small were due to the magnitude of the world's pain. But I began to see that the origin of the sense of smallness was not in the world, but within me. It was reflection of my unfulfilled internal needs for acceptance, for worthiness, for self-love." So I'd love for you to talk to us about what was going on with you, both in terms of your dysregulate, what was happening to your body. I know you wrote about having rosacea and being diagnosed with irritable bowel, but also this sort of deeper awareness of the work you needed to do within yourself.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. Actually, yes, I guess the book is the first time where I really go deep down in this in one of the chapters where I talk about my personal story towards the end. Yes. And it wasn't easy to share all of that. I have to say it felt very vulnerable. But I think that's part of the work, right? Being, yes. And one of the things that I share in the beginning of the book, in the very beginning, is this story about Milarepa, and that's what really helped me, sort of understand what was happening, and why I needed to change. And so the story of Milarepa is the story of this Buddhist monk who essentially finds his cave filled by demons. And there's a story where he starts trying to get rid of these demons in many different ways. First, by trying to chase them away, and then by trying to, teach them about spirituality. He tries a lot of different things. but these approaches don't work. And that's where he realizes that if these demons are going to stay, then there's probably something he must learn from them. And so he bows to the demons and he accepts completely to open himself to them. And that's where actually the demons disappear. So I think for me, the challenge was really, understanding that I needed to stop, like stopping trying to fix myself or trying to do all these things outside that felt like a fulfillment was actually a way to sort of run away or not to really face what was going on. Mm-hmm. And I've been through a variety of different practices and I tried a lot of things, but then I think what really worked was looking at myself, look at my personal history and really trying to accept that, a lot of the things I was doing, they weren't inherently wrong, but they were just, the intention was not correct. So I think, understanding that my strong motivation around work and just putting myself through so much, it was caused by never feeling enough. Like whatever I did, there was always some flaw. And I had to go deep into my personal story, into my life, into my childhood, into the things that, had caused me to believe that I wasn't enough. And so once I was able to, take care of those things, everything else started to fall into its place.
I loved chapter 12. This is the chapter I read the quote from, and I loved the vulnerability in it. And I loved your story. I loved all of the research and all the quizzes and all of the helpful stuff, but I felt really connected to you in that last chapter and hearing your story and then of your ancestors. I think that's our work, Dr. Linnea, in terms of just really allowing ourselves to realize we are enough as we are. Like we don't have to continually prove ourselves. And I think this audience is going to resonate with that part of your story and will also appreciate it when they read the book, how much you share there, because I think it's our story. I think it's so many women's stories. And, this is part of what you're talking about with nervous system dysregulation is avoiding, the burnout and the constant anxiety and learning how to navigate that and come home to ourselves and come home within our bodies because we're constantly striving, but maybe not stopping like you took the time to do, which I think, is an invitation to all of us.
Yeah. And, I think one of the crucial things is also to time this right. So what I think was really important and what I've learned is that in order for someone to go to these vulnerable places and to really, touch into these really deep parts of ourselves that we tend to protect so much. Mm-hmm. We need to do some work before we can go, in so much in depth. And that's what happened to me, and that's also what I've worked to create for and the reason why I created this 5 stages journey to healing nervous system dysregulation, and this work repairing these parts of ourselves, or essentially working to repair these parts of yourself, doesn't come in the beginning. It comes after you have built some sort of tools to regulate yourself. Because one of the problems is that when we go to this difficult part of ourselves very quickly, it can backfire at us because we don't have the tools yet to go to those depths, and they can be so scary. Then, it's like opening a door and getting really scared. And then, we want to shut that door and you don't want to go there anymore. And so that's why, we address this in the restoration phase, and the restoration phase is the 3rd stage, and it comes after you develop awareness, which means being able to sit with things without taking any action and just really being with them and observing them. And that is one of the most difficult things for people because they need to overcome this need to fix whatever is happening. And then the second stage is all about regulation, which is all about building that embodied safety. And that's where, the somatic practices and the nervous system regulation practices come in. And once we have these two foundational steps in place, that's where we can go to, those difficult places, and we can address things, like whatever has happened in our life, like traumatic stressors or attachment wounds, and all of the things that have really created these deep wounds.
Yeah, no, this is so good. So I was thinking two things. One is, let's maybe finish off the 4 and the 5 so they can at least just hear the overview of the 5 steps. And then to go back to what you said, I think there was an example you gave in the book with a woman who was a part of your program who prior had some success with therapy, but not so much because they had gone to level 3 without creating the foundation of safety for her, right? Was it Barbara in the book that you talk about?
Yeah. I mean, she suffered from she had like really important childhood trauma, and she had developed a lot of chronic physical symptoms, and she was really in a bad place. But I think what really made a difference in her journey with us was that we really put her in a position where she could, have these safety tools that she could use. And once that sense of safety was built, then she was able to work with those other treatments. And she was doing therapy and she was doing a lot of things, but it was hard for her to really get to those places. And so doing this kind of somatic work really allowed her and enabled her in other areas, in other things like talk therapy and other things that she was doing, to really see the benefit. And so that's where she was able to really see a lot of advance in her work. But yeah, to answer the question about the 5 stages. So these 3 steps essentially are, I would say, the bulk of the work to heal the dysregulation, and then enable the 2 following steps, which are connection and expansion. So connection is where we are able to essentially connect with others and connect to things that are outside of ourselves in a way that feels safe. And so that's where we connect with the world, not from a place of scarcity, where we need someone else to fix us or to heal us. We connect with the world from a place of, safety. And we connect with the world in a way where we can give back. So, of course, we connect with people throughout our lives, and in any stage we connect with people. But in this connection phase, this is where we're able to, put boundaries in place. For example, we talk a lot about boundaries. We hear a lot of talking about boundaries, but the reality is that when people have these really scary parts of themselves, it's very hard to put boundaries in place. And so to me, boundaries have always been a conquer rather than a precondition to the work. So when you don't feel safe, placing a boundary with someone who, maybe an enmeshed family or a system, or some situation where you have people who overstep constantly those boundaries, what you need to learn is how to follow through those boundaries and what are the consequences if those boundaries are crossed. And so when you are in a place of safety where you can feel safe in yourself and you feel regulated, you're in a completely different place where you're able to actually enforce those boundaries if they are crossed. And so the stage of connection is a stage where we are able to really work on these connection with the rest of the world, and also connection with a purpose larger than ourselves. We know from the science that this is one of the hallmarks of regulation, of a life of meaning, and also of health. People who are connected to things like spirituality or a big cause or whatever really matters to them in life, as long as it's something that they feel connecting them to something larger than themselves, has a wonderful impact on their regulation, but their general health and their happiness ultimately. I don't like to use the word happiness too much, but the point is about, having a healthy life, having a fulfilled life. And that is one of the hallmarks, having this connection. And finally, the expansion phase is where we're able to expand our capacity for both joy and pain. So we have now conquered our dysregulation. We are moving out in the world. We're able to bring the fruits of this regulation to the rest of the world. But we can go even further because we have the ability to expand the capacity of our nervous system, which means using stressors in a smart way. So we know that stress gets a bad rap, but in reality, when you use stress in a way that essentially helps your nervous system be trained to be able to contain more, you increase your resilience, you increase your ability and your capacity for both pain and joy. And one of the other tools to achieve that, besides stress, is awe. Awe is this powerful emotion. There's a lot of research that's been done and that's going on for awe. This powerful state that actually allows us to connect even more with this sense of, being marveled at what is around us, what is inside us, this connection to things larger than ourselves in a way that also expands our nervous system's capacity.
I love it. And I'm thinking about, I had a couple of, one was a neuroscientist. They wrote a book on neuroaesthetics, which you also talk about in the book. And one of the things that they were talking about also was the power of awe. But, when you're talking about fulfillment, I mean, that's so aligned with really the heart of this podcast and being able to get to that place. But if women are going to the doctor or, they're trying to seek out help, let's say it's a physical symptom, right? Like maybe they have digestive issues or stomach pain, like you did, like an IBS that maybe had been triggered from nervous system dysregulation. Are they getting the help they need? Because I'm getting the sense that, people do people know enough about this? Do the doctors know enough about this? Or is everyone just putting a Band-Aid on and people aren't really getting the help that they need?
So I don't want to put too much, cracks on doctors, because the reality is that we don't get this kind of training. This is all really new stuff, and we are still learning and understanding. But the reality, unfortunately, is that especially women, and especially when they get, after they had kids, or even if they didn't have kids, they get to a place in life where their hormones start to go down. They get to a place where a lot of things start to come together, and they create a lot of symptoms, of physical symptoms and emotional symptoms. And we don't really have the ability, especially as a medical system, we don't have the ability to unpack the different components of this discomfort, of these symptoms. And so, the easiest way is to just, give a medicine, or just, essentially
treat what's coming in. You have anxiety, we'll give you an anxiety medicine. You're depressed,
or downplay. Like another thing that really bothers me personally as a woman in, going through that phase, is that it's like, well, this is the way it is. I mean, it doesn't have to be that way. There are ways to change that. And so I've been, sitting in front of, doctors and colleagues who are often males, but even women sometimes. And they just, it's like, well, you have to live with that. But the reality is that we are starting to know so much and learn so much that we need to become our own advocates about these things. We need to understand how nervous system regulation can make a difference, how having, treatments in place for our hormonal situation. We have amazing treatments now that are available, hormone replacement therapy, and so many other tools that we can use so that, we can extend and we can increase our joy, our ability to experience things in a way that is fulfilling for us as women, especially going through that mid-age and all those problems that we are all familiar with.
Yeah, I love this. And it's fair what you're saying. And also I've had so many doctors who are advocates now, who are OBGYNs, urologists, who, they admit they never had the training and they've done a deep dive into the research so that they can serve their clients in a better way. And they admit how, they were taught to just sort of dismiss it or downplay it or tell a woman that she's overreacting, that they didn't know how to take care of them, but that's all changing. There was an interesting part in the book where when you're talking about highly sensitive people or people being called too sensitive, I can completely relate with this terminology. We've talked a little bit on the show about it, but how does it correlate to dysregulation or just our ability to regulate? If you could elaborate on that, that would be fantastic. Because I think I know from having done one episode on it that it really resonated with a lot of the women in my audience. And so I think they'd love to get your perspective.
Yeah, so that's one of the most common questions I get, because a lot of people, we have a large Instagram community, and so we have this post, and so some people will comment, but high sensitivity is just trauma or dysregulation or things like that, and it's actually not. And so there's a lot of research. And it's becoming more and more prevalent. We know that sensitivity is actually, something that we are learning to understand what it actually means from a physical, emotional perspective. It is considered a personality trait, but this personality trait has actually, genes and physical correspondence in the body. So we know that no matter how sensitive you are, you fall somewhere on that sensitivity spectrum. And that is really what creates your ability to perceive the external world. And so referring back to, we were talking about women in middle age, hormonal changes can change and can have a big impact on how people perceive things outside themselves. So there are a lot of different things in life that can change or increase our sensitivity, but that doesn't mean we are necessarily dysregulated. Dysregulation comes from specific, stressful situations and from specific, fear and stress, et cetera. These can all cause our body and nervous system to go into a sense of overwhelm that eventually becomes dysregulation. But dysregulation is very, very different from sensitivity. So dysregulation can affect anyone regardless of their sensitivity level, but it's actually more common among those who are more sensitive. And that is one of the cruel things about sensitivity, which is we end up like people with high sensitivity. They are very gifted in many ways. And so they become people who, maybe they're artists, they're creators, they are leaders. They sort of lead the world in many ways, but they're also cruelly the ones that are more prone to developing dysregulation. And so things like burnout, anxiety, chronic physical symptoms, chronic pain, all of these things end up becoming more common in people who are more sensitive, not because of their sensitivity per se, but because their dysregulation has caused them to experience those symptoms. But at the same time, because they are so sensitive, because they are so perceptive, we also know, and the research is also supporting that they are more likely to positively respond to interventions. So, for example, when people who score high in sensitivity go through our program or go through an intervention where they are really working on developing regulation, they respond more and better than people who are lower on the sensitivity spectrum. Yeah. And that is a huge thing for me to know as someone who works with people with dysregulation, because people can become very, very depressed and very sad about thinking that their sensitivity is some sort of flaw. Whereas actually it's just a trait. There's not necessarily a positive or negative correlation to that. it's an advantage in certain situations and it becomes a disadvantage in other situations, just like all traits and conditions.
Right.
But it's true that they are more prone to developing these things. But it's also true that when they learn about, their nervous system, their sensitivity, their dysregulation, et cetera, they have agency to change the situation, and they are more effective once they implement the right practices in reversing these conditions.
This is so helpful, and just to have like a better, clearer picture of of all of it. But I'm wondering, I love to give tangible things that women can do. Obviously, they can pick up the book and go through the 5 steps and everything. I know you also talk about the 4 pillars of the nervous system. I'm just wondering, what can we offer? Anything you can share? Favorite things that you do to help your nervous system?
Yeah. So we didn't address this in depth previously, but I do want to talk about the layer that I call structure. This layer is essentially the foundation upon which we build those 5 stages that we discussed before. So this structure is essentially how it's daily habits, daily things that you can do. And especially it has to do with how much time you spend outdoors. Spending time outdoors, exposing your eyes and your body to the outdoor light is a crucial component of, helping your nervous system regulate. So, I make it a point personally every morning when I wake up to go outside and to allow enough sunshine to get into my eyes and to spend enough time. And I try to take a walk, So combining movement, which can be, it depends, of course, on the condition of the person. A lot of the people we work with have chronic conditions, so they can't necessarily do a lot of, vigorous movement, but they can get there. With time, they get there. So movement, which can be as little as, taking walks, like vigorous walks, but also having like an actual plan in place for exercise. All of these things, like this is probably the single most important intervention that we can implement in our life on a daily basis to impact how our mood and how our nervous system work. And then, of course, there's nutrition. One of the things that I try to do personally, because I know it makes a big difference in my life, is focusing on having enough fermented food on a daily basis, because our gut is highly connected to our nervous system. And so when we create an environment in our gut that is very diverse, with a lot of good microbes, this really helps our body and nervous system regulate better. And so, for example, I personally make it a point to have at least 2 or 3 servings each day of fermented food, low sugar fermented food. So it can be yogurt, it can be fermented vegetables. This is really something that makes a big difference for me and for many other people. It's the same. And also, of course, we hear a lot about, keeping our glucose steady. That's also a really important point. When we have these big spikes, when we eat a lot of sugar, it can be a problem for the nervous system. It can create bouts of anxiety. It's harder for the body to manage regulation. And so all of these interventions that we can do in our daily life. And again, one of the crucial points that we always highlight is that it's important to do small things on a consistent basis every day. So doing like just one of the things I mentioned, but on a consistent basis is going to have a compounding effect on the nervous system and on the body. So this structure, these interventions are really a supportive element of everything else that we do.
I love it because that's also very doable. What you said is very doable. And correct me if I got this wrong, but the takeaway I just heard, or it also read in the book, was, the foundation of starting with your body. Is that right? Because you talked about movement, light, what you're feeding it, nourishing it, our microbiome, which is so important. and how that impacts our physiology and our brain health, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is absolutely crucial. We tend to think that our mind and our body are two separate things, but
Yeah,
there's no distinction. They work together. They are constantly connected. They are one thing. So whatever we
fascinating.
do with the body is
Yes.
going to have an impact on the mind, and vice versa.
Yeah, I saw one of your Instagram posts where you were lifting some weights and spinning in a chair. Tell us a little bit about, just strengthening our body as well.
So one of the things that I really like about, especially to talk about when people are highly sensitive or have a high degree of sensitivity or have sensory overload, etc., is working with deep, like thinking about exercise through the lens of sensory stimulation. And so thinking about, for example, exercises that really create a lot of input for certain parts of the body. So, for example, deep proprioceptive input, which is something that we can do even just by doing our housekeeping,
Yes.
doing really like strong muscle work,
Yes.
lifting weights, etc. All these things create this deep proprioceptive input. And this really, it's like telling the nervous system, you're safe. Things are under control. This muscle stimulation sends a message to the nervous system that it's safe. And this has a huge effect on things like anxiety, and all those symptoms that we tend to experience. So doing these simple things like the ones you saw on my Instagram feed can have a really big impact if it's done, every day with just keep doing it, keep doing a little bit every day.
I love it. And again, all very doable. And some of the things I saw, like carrying your laundry up and down the stairs, I was like, oh, that's
Yes.
great. So maybe we're doing some of it without even realizing it's sort of built in. If somebody has really chronic or overwhelming anxiety, or they're living in the what ifs, or, their body's freezing, where do they start if they're on that end of things where they're just feeling overwhelmed?
So look, we talked about the limits of the medical system, but I also am a strong supporter of using medication when needed, and speaking with doctors when needed. So when there's an extreme situation where people are experiencing really negative thoughts or self-harming thoughts, it's really crucial to seek help and to get immediate help, and possibly even to get medication to start. But
Okay.
when things are not that extreme, when they
Yeah.
can really, they feel more, in control of the situation, then starting to learn about nervous system dysregulation is the first step, like building
Yeah.
this awareness. And that's why we have created this assessment, which, in just 1 month, we've had like thousands of people, almost 10,000 people have taken it, because there's this need for people to understand what are the components, what does it actually mean? What does it mean for me, for my specific situation? How is this regulation showing in my body, in my
Right.
emotions, in the way I go about in life? And so that's why we created this assessment, and we've made it public on our website. So people can start by understanding, how dysregulation is showing in their lives.
Yes.
And another thing is understanding their sensitivity. So when people are, on the higher end of the spectrum of sensitivity, they really benefit from understanding and like opening their eyes that all of those things that they experience are probably related to their sensitivity. And so learning that and then starting to take small actions like the ones I described is really going to make a difference.
I thought it was really encouraging when you said that you can heal, you can heal it, you can get regulated, you can regulate your nervous system again, even if you've had the traumas or all these situations that have overwhelmed you because you didn't have the awareness, you didn't have the tools that it's accessible. Is there anything I didn't ask that you really think is important to leave the women listening with today?
No, I think, as you just pointed out, my main message in this is that, if there was one takeaway, I think it's really important to have both perspectives, which is one is whatever you are experiencing is not just in your mind. It's not just something that, doesn't exist. And it doesn't even necessarily need a diagnosis to be worthy and to be important. If it's pain to you and if it's creating problems in your life, it matters. It is something that's real to you, and it's something that is real in your body and in your nervous system. Yes. And so there's real damage and real pain that is created because of that. And at the same time, on the other hand, you have agency. You have the capacity to address whatever is causing these problems and to change. You're not defined by your symptoms. You're not defined by your past, whatever happened to you. You are not defined by, whether you are sensitive or not. You have agency to shape how your body and nervous system work. And you have agency to shape your stress response and to expand your capacity so that you can, start to experience again joy and fulfillment and feeling completely able to live life.
Absolutely. And everyone deserves that, and they deserve access to that. I like to ask for fun, since the show's called The Good Life. What does living a good life mean to you, Dr. Linnea?
I guess the most important thing to me is just spending time with my kids and my family, and being able to possibly contribute to creating a world in the future that is more regulated for them and more in peace and more livable.
I love it. And you mentioned you have that course, and people can find you online. So let's direct them to that. What's your website so I can link that for them in the show notes?
So they can find everything at healyournervoussystem.com. And we also have our Instagram community and our email list. So if they want to take the assessment that I just mentioned, that's the best way. They can find me everywhere as Heal Your Nervous System.
I love that. I love that. It's like with the book and the program and everything, it makes it really easy. And all of the show notes for today will be over at thegoodlifecoach.com. And I'll have all of those resources linked up, or you can just head directly over to healyournervoussystem.com or connect with Dr. Linnea I think that assessment I'd be very curious to take. And thank you for the work that you're doing. I think we're going to be hearing more about this, and I think you're going to be leading the way with it. It's just so important.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much for this and for having me.
That's my pleasure. Such an honor. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you gained some new information or inspiration for your life. That the essence of this show is to really wake up to what's possible for you, to reclaim your beautiful voice, and to really learn to love and prioritize yourself. So if you gained any value from any of the conversations you've tuned into, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast player. You can do that right now on your phone. And please do consider leaving a rating and review if you have yet to do so on Apple Podcasts. It's actually how more women can find the show, and I really want to grow a community of women who are loving themselves and living full on. So thank you as always for tuning in, and I look forward to reconnecting with you next Wednesday. Bye for now.
This podcast is presented for entertainment and educational purposes only. Any information provided is not intended to be a substitute for medical, mental health, or other professional advice. Seek out your trusted healthcare provider or other qualified professional for all matters dealing with your health and well-being. Any opinions or information provided by a guest are their own and not those of Michelle Lamoureux or the company.